Okay, team. So tonight is our first night looking at Exile. But, why will we do this? Well, exile is a huge theme in the Bible, and it challenges what God's people think of him and their faith in him. And we're also in one sort of an exile. So, maybe the things that God's people in the Bible learned about him during exile can also be applicable and helpful to us now. But before we look at this, before we dive into these passages, there's some things we've got to go over first. And firstly, we've got to look at context. So what we're aiming to tackle tonight is the who, what, when, and where of exile. We'll leave why to next week because that's a talk all in itself. But we're aiming to tackle those questions. And so if we start off, we look at the who. The who takes us to the end of the reign of Solomon. So we've got Saul is the first king of Israel. Then you've got his son, or not his son. You've got David who takes over him. Then David's son, Solomon. And Solomon has a couple of sons, but the two who kind of rise to be like the cream of the crop are Jeroboam and Rehoboam. And these guys both want to rule over the whole of the nation of Israel. And so what they end up doing is they actually split it in half, right? Which would be like splitting Australia in half. I'm going to do some screen sharing stuff, so you can see what I mean. Boom. Okay.
Ow.
Okay. So all of this land here was just one nation at one point in time. It was all Israel. But these guys, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, split it up into two. Now, why am I telling you this? What's the point? Because it's important that we understand that these people in the north are always referred to as Israel. And these people in the south are always referred to as Judah. Israel's capital city is Samaria here. And Judah's capital city is Jerusalem. And so both of them are really important places for both nations, obviously. So you don't need to remember the names of the two sons. That's not important. But remember these names. And know that whenever the prophets the prophets or the people recording history in the exile talk about one of these people, they're referring to those specific people. It's not often that when someone says Judah, they're referring to the whole of this again. Or sorry, Israel, they're referring to the whole of this. They're just referring to this. And when they say Judah, they're referring to God's people in the south. Any questions at that point? Give me a thumbs up if you're good.
No.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, there are some other people who you'll need to remember just for now. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the Persians. They're just names at this point. We'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about them later. Cool. Basically, that's who. That's the who of the exile. Woo! Oh, and you've got God as well. God's there. Cool. All right. Okay, next is what? I'll stop screen sharing. When I say exile, what do you think?
Like banished.
Yeah, banished. Yep. Can you be a little bit more specific?
Banished from a place you were, or like wandering through the desert, or sentenced to that.
Yeah. Any other ideas?
I guess kind of similar to that, like just kicked out of their land because of punishment.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way when I was thinking about this, the way that I sort of designed exile was being taken out of your home, taken away from your people and away from your family to live in a foreign land under foreign rule, all against your will. Now, our exile might be a little bit different to that. We're stuck at home with our family and only our family in extremely tight quarters. Under a rule that perhaps maybe we don't like very much, and I think in pretty much everyone's cases, against our wills. Um, but they're still pretty different, I think, in the long run. Any questions about exile at that point on what exile is? No, all good. Give me a thumbs up. Awesome. Okay. So when and where. So to do this, I'm going to screen share, and we're going to look at a cool little timeline that comes from the next gen material. And so if you do LIT, sorry, if you do next gen after LIT, you get to look forward to some really awesome stuff like this. And so here's a Bible timeline to do. So we've talked about Saul and David and Solomon and his two sons, Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And this is where the kingdom splits, right? Now, the years aren't that important. If you want, you can take note of the years. But the first thing I want you to notice is Israel and what happens to them. So they go on for a little bit, and there are some people like warning them to not be bad, but then they get exiled to Assyria, right? So kind of let me show you what that looks like on a map. You come up here, awesome. So this is where, if I'll be a little more specific, this is where Israel is. Israel and Judah. Well, maybe a little bit close to the coast. Yeah, somewhere there. Yeah, cool. Now, this whole area, I chose this map because this whole area is like all highlighted in green, right? Because it's called the Fertile Crescent. What that means is that all these rivers and stuff through here and through here as well, and no rivers around here and not many here and all rocky and stuff here, means that this area in here is super awesome to have, like, farming and plants and cattle, because there's lots of really cool grass, like top quality grass. So it's a really awesome place to live, which means that a lot of people are fighting over it, right? Everyone wants to live here. And Judah and Israel, they live like smack bang, like right in a real nice part of it. And so you've got the Assyrians up here, right? And we read about them. And they come down south. They're like, oh, yeah, sweet, we'll take over all this land. And they hit Israel. And they fight with Israel a couple of times. And then eventually they destroy Israel. And they take all of the, they take a lot of people from Israel back up into Assyria, into exile. Then what they do is they get lots of other people from all the cross places they've conquered and bring them into where Israel used to be to kind of populate it. And then we get like a big mix of people, and we call that mix of people, or the Bible calls that mix of people, the Samaritans. And so, when we hit the Good Samaritan story in the New Testament, that's kind of like the background to his people. But anyway, I digress. So let's go back down to the timeline. Cool. So these people, they get exiled in 722 BC. And we don't really hear from Israel after that. Well, the story focuses on Judah as God's chosen people. So while all this is happening, there are prophets going to Judah as well, and they're trying to warn Judah that exile is coming up. But in between when these guys get exiled and this bit of time here, another big kingdom grows, right? Because there's people always fighting over this stuff all the time, and it's the Babylonians, and they're down here, right? And they're super strong because they get all of these people here, and they do like big pushes all the way across. So by the time they get to Assyria, they're super strong, and so they like gobble up the Assyrians, right? And they gobble all the way down here as well, and they get to Judah, and they invade Judah, and they take over, and we get the first deportation, the first exile. I think probably is a bit better. And so the first time the Babylonians invade, they take the ruling class with them. It's a little crown. Haha, how terrible is that? They take all the blacksmiths with them. That's like, you guys have seen like a blacksmith's like iron before.
Anvil.
Yeah, an anvil. Thank you. Yep. And they take all the weaponsmiths as well. Wow. What am I going to draw? A sword. Yeah. Woo. So they take all. They take the ruling class, the blacksmiths, and the weaponsmiths. There's no one to rule except for the people that the Babylonians choose. There's no one to make any weapons or any hardware that the Judeans can use to fight Babylon. But what happens? Of course, the Judeans rebel again. And so Babylon's like, come on, guys, I'm going to come and sort you out properly this time. And so they come again in 586 BC, and they take pretty much everyone back, except for like people who are straight up nobodies. And they take them, remember they're walking, right? They walk, is there a scale on this? Fantastic, 500 kilometers. How far do we reckon that is? 1,000, boom. So they easily walk 1,000 kilometers, right? From here all the way over there in chains, right? They've just lost their homes. They've just lost their loved ones. People are probably dying on the road as well. And to top it all off, God's gone as well. Something that I forgot to say was that when the Babylonians came the second time, they completely destroyed the temple and they tore it down. And so God's house was destroyed. And so they're walking this whole 1,000 kilometers. Where's my God? Why hasn't God saved me? And so it's this emotional journey of the the Judeans going into exile that we're exploring. You know, what challenges were there to their faith? How did they overcome those challenges? How did they come back? And where was God the whole time? Those are the kind of things we'll be looking at during our exile series. They get exiled, and where's the timeline say? Oh, my hands. They're exiled for 70 years, okay? And they come back after the Persians, boom, here they are. The Persians, who are a people from here, who are these? Gold. They're from here. They just like, boof, they attack everyone. They come out of nowhere, like literally come out of nowhere. They're like the Stephen Bradburys of nations. And they just whoop everyone's butts. And after they're finished whooping everyone's butts, their king, Cyrus, says, hey, if Babylon took you as a slave, just go home. You know, go home. Which is crazy, because why would he do that? And so we read in the book of Ezra that God used Cyrus, and even in Isaiah that God had it planned on Cyrus's heart that was going to happen. And so everyone heads back. They trickle back over time, over about 50 years, and they rebuild the temple and they rebuild the walls, and they try to be God's people again. But it's not the same. And they're left waiting for something. So that's kind of the exile story in big, very giant, broad brushstrokes. But it's a little bit more than that. It's not just about this period in history. It's a lot more than that. Exile is actually a metaphor for something bigger happening in the Bible. And so I'm going to post a link in the chat, or for those playing along at home, in the YouTube video description, for a video by the Bible Project, which is very helpful in actually showing us that exile is much, much bigger than this. And so what I want you to do after this, guys, after we've finished, is go check out that video. But maybe come back and we'll have a quick. We'll chat about it next week, or we'll chat about it during the week. Cool. Sound good? Cool.